The first thing you need to understand about the end of the Taloran Empire is that it didn't happen all at once. It started with what their scientists called minor gravitational anomalies in their outer system. You know, the kind of readings that make bureaucrats file reports and forget about them over lunch. But Ambassador Velka wasn't having lunch when the first biomechanical nightmare tore through reality itself. She was standing on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel, Serenity's Dream, watching her homeworld's 3 purple suns paint the sky in shades of lavender and gold. The Taloran capital city stretched beneath them like a crystal spiderweb, its towers reaching toward the heavens in graceful spirals that had taken millennia to perfect. Beautiful, wasn't it? It's the kind of place that made you believe in the inherent goodness of advanced civilizations. Then the sky started screaming. The first hive ship burst through the dimensional barrier like a tumor erupting through healthy flesh. Picture something that used to be a whale. If whales were made of living metal and had the kind of hunger that could swallow stars, its biomechanical hull pulsed with veins of corrupted energy, and when it opened what might charitably be called a mouth, the sound it made wasn't communication, it was pure, distilled appetite. By the ancient codes, whispered Captain Thurn beside her, his elegant features going pale. What in the void is that thing? Velka's diplomatic training kicked in, even as her mind recoiled from what she was seeing. Send an immediate communication to the Galactic Council. Priority Alpha. Tell them we have a first contact situation that requires the second ship arrive before she could finish the sentence. Then the third, and dozens more, each one larger and hungrier than the last, until the space around Talaran. Prime looked like a feeding frenzy of mechanical sharks. You want to know the really terrifying part? The hive didn't attack the military installations first. They went straight for the schools. The emergency klaxons were still warming up when biomechanical tendrils, H1 the width of a city bus, started wrapping around the Academy of Higher. Learning in Sector 7, Velka watched through the ship's sensors as the building and the 3,000 young Taloran minds inside was simply absorbed into the creature's hull. No explosion, no dramatic collapse, just their one moment. Gone the next, like it had never existed at all. That's when her training finally broke. Emergency broadcast to all civilized species. She gasped into the communication array, her voice cracking with the kind of terror that bypasses your brain and comes straight from your soul. This is Ambassador Velka of the Taloran Empire. Dimensional barriers have been breached. Unknown hostiles or another school vanished. Then a hospital. The creatures weren't just destroying things, they were consuming them, turning matter and energy and life itself into more of themselves. They're in the cities now, she continued, watching helplessly as tendrils erupted from beneath the crystal streets like metallic roots. They're eating everything alive. Our children. Oh gods, our children are trapped in the schools, ... This communication array sparked and hissed as another hive vessel passed overhead, its bioelectrical field interfering with their primitive technology. Through the static, Velka could hear Captain Theron coordinating with what remained of their defense fleet. It wasn't going well. Ma'am, the Arcatarian battlecruiser Righteousness just went dark, reported Lieutenant Zara from the sensor station. That's the third heavy warship in 5 minutes. Their bioships are adapting to our weapons faster than we can deploy them. Velka closed her eyes and tried to think. The Galactic Council had protocols for this kind of situation, didn't they? Mutual defense treaties, rapid response fleets, the kind of civilized cooperation that separated enlightened species from savage Deathworlders. Have we heard back from the Council? She asked. The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. Through the ship's transparent aluminum viewport, she watched her civilization die in real time. The graceful spires that had taken millennia to build were being consumed, like cotton candy, dissolved into their component atoms and rebuilt into more biomechanical horrors. The 3 purple suns still shone overhead, but now their light reflected off surfaces that pulsed with alien hunger. And here's the part that really gets me. Even as her world was being devoured, even as millions of her people were being converted into nightmare fuel, Velka's first instinct was still diplomatic. She kept broadcasting, kept pleading with the civilized species to help, right up until the moment she remembered something that made her blood run cold. We rejected the humans. From our council, she whispered into the communication array, her voice barely audible above the static. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. Called them savage Deathworlders. See, 6 months earlier, humanity had applied for membership in the Galactic Council. Standard procedure for emerging spacefaring species: show up, demonstrate your technology, prove you're civilized enough to join the galaxy's most exclusive club. Should have been routine. But humans, well, humans were different. They came from Earth, a Class 12 death world, where everything in died to kill you. Gravity that could crush most species, weather patterns that could sterilize continents, and an ecosystem so aggressively competitive that humans had to invent the concept of extinction just to keep track of all the things they'd accidentally killed off. The Council took one look at human history, the wars, the violence, the stubborn refusal to just lie down and die when faced with impossible odds, and decided that humanity was incompatible with civilized society. The vote wasn't even close. Velka had cast her vote against human membership herself. She remembered the reasoning: too aggressive, too unpredictable, too willing to resort to violence when diplomacy was clearly the superior option. The kind of species that would probably start a war over something trivial, like territorial disputes or resource allocation. The kind of species that had never learned to surrender. But if anyone is listening, she continued, watching another transport full of refugees get swallowed by a biomechanical horror, if there's any mercy left in this galaxy. ... The message began looping automatically as the Serenity's dream limped toward the edge of the system. Captain Theron had managed to get the engines online, but their destination was academic. Where exactly do you run when reality itself is being consumed? Behind them, the enlightened species of the galaxy were demonstrating their superiority through the time-honored tradition of strategic withdrawal. The Valdorian fleet had jumped to hyperspace the moment the first hive ship appeared. The Centauri delegation had issued a strongly worded statement condemning the violence before disappearing into the void. Even the mighty Arcturian Empire, with their kilometer-long warships and their proud military traditions, had decided that discretion was the better part of valor. Too risky, they all said. The hive was unstoppable. It's better to preserve their civilized way of life than waste resources on a lost cause. But 57 light-years away, in a star system that most of the galaxy considered barely worth mapping, something else was happening. On a blue-green world where life had learned to fight for every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of existence, primitive radar arrays were picking up Ambassador Velka's desperate transmission in underground bunkers beneath the Rocky Mountains, in orbital stations circling the outer planets, in military command centers on colony worlds that had been written off as too dangerous for civilized settlement. Humans were listening to an alien woman beg for help, and in the depths of their death-world souls, something ancient and terrible was stirring. Not anger, that was too small a word. Not rage, that implied a loss of control. This was something colder, more focused, more absolutely implacable than any emotion the civilized galaxy could comprehend. This was the promise that every parent makes to their child, every soldier makes to their unit, every human makes to the innocent: you will not face the darkness alone. The outcasts were listening, and they were already reaching for their weapons. What the hive was about to learn, what the entire galaxy was about to discover, was that there's a big difference between being savage and being willing to do savage things to protect the defenseless. The civilized species had spent millennia perfecting the art of sophisticated surrender. Humans had spent the same millennia perfecting the art of sophisticated violence, and they were very, very good at it. You know what's funny about being called a monster? Eventually you start to believe it yourself. But here's the thing, nobody tells you is sometimes the galaxy needs its monsters. Admiral Jack Reeves had been staring at the same holographic display for 17 straight hours, watching entire star systems wink out of existence like candles being snuffed by an invisible hand. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he kept drinking it anyway, more out of habit than necessity. His scarred face, a souvenir from the Martian mining riots 20 years back, reflected. the blue glow of tactical screens that showed nothing. But bad news, the war room at Terra Command buzzed with controlled chaos. Officers moved between workstations like dancers in some grim ballet, their voices low and urgent as they processed the incoming data from the Toleran system. Every few minutes, another red dot would appear on the galactic map, marking another world gone dark. Another billion souls, consumed by something that shouldn't exist, but it was the smaller screen in the corner that really got to him, the one showing Ambassador. Velka's transmission on an endless loop, her voice cracking with terror as she begged for help from the same species she'd voted to exclude from civilized society just 6 months earlier. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh approached cautiously, a datapad clutched in her hands. "The latest sensor readings from the Architarian system just came in. It's gone, sir. All of it." Reeves didn't look up from the display. "All of it, Commander. 3 inhabited worlds, 2 mining colonies, and approximately 4 billion sentient beings. The hive consumed everything down to the planetary cores. What's left wouldn't qualify as asteroids." That's when Admiral Jack Reeves, veteran of 3 colonial wars, survivor of the Europa Station siege, and the man who'd held the line at New Singapore when everyone else said it was impossible, finally lost his temper. His fist came down on the war table with enough force to crack the reinforced polymer surface. The holographic display flickered and sparked, casting dancing shadows across his weathered features. Around him, every conversation stopped as 50 of humanity's finest military minds turned to watch their commander have what the psych evaluators would later classify as a controlled emotional release. "They laughed at us," he growled, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from watching good people die for stupid reasons. "Called us barbaric animals when we applied for council membership.
Always said I should.
Our violent nature made us unfit for civilized space." The assembled fleet commanders exchanged glances. They all remembered the hearings, broadcast live across human space, with the kind of ceremonial pomp that the galaxy's enlightened species used to make rejection feel like a privilege. The Taloran representative had been particularly eloquent, describing humanity as a species whose evolutionary path has been shaped by conflict rather than cooperation. Colonel Emma Stone stepped forward from the crowd, her jaw set in the kind of line that usually preceded someone making a career-limiting decision. Stone was known throughout the fleet as someone who didn't back down from a fight. But right now, she looked like she was wrestling with something more personal than military strategy. "My daughter asked me why the pretty aliens on the news said, 'We were monsters, sir,'" she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough edge to cut through the tension in the room. "You want to know what that does to a parent? Watching your kid's face crumple as some perfectly groomed alien diplomat explains to the galaxy why humans are too dangerous to join the grown-ups table." Stone's daughter Lucy was 8 years old, the kind of kid who collected toy spaceships and dreamed of exploring distant worlds. Now she was asking her mother why the universe thought they were the bad guys. Reeves turned away from the tactical display for the first time in hours, his eyes scanning the faces of the men and women who'd followed him through hell more times than any of them cared to count. Marines who'd held impossible positions on colony worlds that were supposed to be strategically irrelevant. Navy pilots who'd flown through asteroid fields that would make sane people weep. Army commanders who'd turned backwater settlements into fortresses that could withstand anything the universe threw at them. Monsters, every one of them, at least according to the Galactic Council. "Because they never understood what monsters really look like," Reeves replied, pointing at the writhing mass of biomechanical horror that was consuming the hive's advance across the tactical display. "But they're about to learn the difference between a monster and a guardian. The distinction might seem academic to you, but it's everything to a soldier. A monster destroys because it can. Guardian destroys because it must. Same tools, same training, same willingness to do terrible things in service of a greater good. The only difference is what you're protecting, and right now, humanity was about to protect a galaxy that had spent 6 months explaining why they didn't deserve protection. The authorization came down through channels so classified that most of the people in the room didn't even know they existed. Every human government, from the sprawling Federal Republic of Earth to the hard-scrabble mining collectives in the Outer Rim, had reached the same conclusion simultaneously. Full military mobilization wasn't just recommended, it was mandatory. Within minutes, the war room's communication arrays were lit up like Christmas morning. Transport ships across human space were dumping their cargo holds to make room for Marines. Colonial defense forces were stripping their garrisons to the bone. Even the merchant marine was volunteering their vessels for what everyone knew was a one-way trip. You should have seen Atan entire species dropping everything to help people who'd literally voted them out of civilized society. It makes you wonder who the real monsters were, doesn't it? Captain Mike Torres was suiting up in Hangar Bay 7 when the final deployment orders came through. His fighter, a sleek little death machine that the Navy called a Raptor-class interceptor, sat in its launch cradle like a patient predator, waiting for the hunt to begin. Around him, dozens of other pilots were going through the same ritual, checking weapons systems, reviewing tactical data, and trying not to think too hard about the math. The math was simple, really. Human space could muster maybe 2,000 combat-capable vessels. If they scraped together every ship that could mount a weapon, the Hive had already consumed fleets 10 times that size without breaking stride. Even if every human pilot was worth 10 of the enemy, which was optimistic on a good day, they were still looking at odds that would make a bookie weep. But, God, Mike wasn't thinking about math as he strapped himself into the cockpit. He was thinking about his son Danny, back home on New Texas, playing with those little plastic alien figures that every kid seemed to collect these days. The good guys in Danny's games were always the Tallarans and Arcturians, the pretty ones with their elegant ships and their civilized ways of solving problems. The humans in those toy sets were always the villains. How's that for irony? Mike muttered to himself as he ran through his pre-flight checklist. This kid thinks the aliens are the heroes, and here we are about to die for them. His wingman, Lieutenant Beth Carter, crackled over the cum system from the fighter beside him. You say something, boss? Just thinking about bedtime stories, Beth? How many of them end with the monsters saving the day? Not enough of them, she replied, and Mike could hear the grin in her voice. Maybe we should write some new ones. The launch sequence began with the deep thrumming of magnetic catapults charging up. I could see his cockpit canopy. Mike could see the stars waiting beyond the hangar bay doors, same stars that had watched humanity claw its way up from a single, overcrowded world to a sprawling, interstellar civilization. They'd done it without help, without guidance, without anyone telling them they were good enough to deserve a place at the big kids' table. They'd done it by being too stubborn to know when they were beaten. The Hive was about to learn what that stubbornness looked like when it was pointed in their direction. All fighters, this is Control, came the voice from the tower. You are cleared for launch. Give them hell, people. One by one, the Raptors screamed out into the void, their engines painting brief stars against the darkness. Behind them, the massive bulk of humanity's battle fleet began its ponderous acceleration toward the Taloran system. Destroyers and cruisers and massive dreadnoughts that had been designed for one purpose: to take on impossible odds and somehow find a way to win. Today, the monsters were going to save the galaxy whether it wanted saving or not. And somewhere, in the deep black between the stars, something that had consumed entire civilizations was about to meet the one species in the galaxy that had never learned the meaning of the word surrender. This was going to be interesting. You know that moment in every horror movie when the cavalry finally shows up? Music swells, hope returns, and everyone in the theater breathes a sigh of relief because the good guys are here? Well, this wasn't that kind of movie. The human fleet tore through hyperspace like a pack of wolves scenting blood. Their emergence into the Taloran system, marked by the kind of gravitational distortions that made nearby space hiccup in surprise. 2,000 ships materializing simultaneously wasn't exactly subtle. It was the interstellar equivalent of kicking down the front door and announcing you were here to settle some debts. Admiral Reeves stood on the bridge of the UES Vengeance, watching his tactical display populate with target data faster than his computers could process it. The Hive's bioships hung around the dying Talaron worlds like mechanical vultures. their organic hulls pulsing with the light of consumed civilizations. Beautiful, in a way that made your soul want to crawl into a corner and hide. Jesus Christ, whispered Commander Walsh beside him, her face going pale as the scope of the carnage became clear. Sir, there are hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Through the bridge's armored viewport, they could see Taloran Prime burning in the distance, or what was left of it. The planet's elegant crystal cities were being systematically devoured by biomechanical tendrils that writhed across the surface like metallic intestines. Every few seconds, another piece of civilization would simply vanish. It's absorbed into the hive's growing mass. But here's what really got to Reeves: the silence. No screaming, no explosions, no dramatic death throes. Just the quiet, methodical sound of an entire species being processed like cattle. That's when Ambassador Velka's transmission crackled through their communications array, her voice carrying the kind of shock that comes from seeing impossible things happen in real time. Unknown vessels, please respond. This is Ambassador Velka of the Taloran Empire. Identify yourselves immediately, or her voice caught as the sensor data reached her screens. Are you... humans? But your council application was denied. Why would you risk coming here? The hive will consume you just like they consumed us. Reeves picked up the handset, his scarred fingers drumming against the metal casing as he considered his response. Around him, the bridge crew waited with the kind of tense silence that usually preceded someone making a historically significant mistake. Because someone has to, he said finally, his voice carrying across the void with the weight of absolute certainty. And wasn't that just perfect? It's the most important moment in human history. And their opening line was 4 words that could have been lifted from any action movie ever made. No grand speeches about justice or freedom or the inherent dignity of sentient life. It's just a simple statement of fact that cut through 6 months of diplomatic double talk like a plasma torch through tissue paper. How many civilians are trapped? Down there? Reeves continued, already knowing he wasn't going to like the answer. 400 million on the capital world, Velka whispered, her transmission crackling with interference from the hive's bioelectrical fields. Maybe twice that in the outer colonies. But you don't understand, the hive adapts to everything. They consumed the Arcturian battle fleet in minutes. They learned from every attack, every weapon, every tactic. Their bioships restructured themselves in real time to counter whatever you throw at them. The fear in her voice was real, visceral, the kind that comes from watching the impossible become inevitable. The Arcturian Empire had fielded the most advanced military in known spaceships the size of cities. Weapons that could crack moons, defensive systems that had never been breached in 3,000 years of warfare. The hive had eaten them for breakfast and asked for seconds. But Lieutenant Dave Mitchell, manning the weapons console behind Reeves, just chuckled, the kind of sound that suggested he'd heard this song before and wasn't particularly impressed by the lyrics. Lady, he interrupted, his Tennessee drawl cutting through the bridge's tension like a knife through butter. They ain't fought humans before. You want to know what makes that statement so terrifying? It wasn't bragging? Mitchell, a 20-year veteran who'd cut his teeth in the asteroid mining wars, was simply stating a fact. The hive might have consumed dozens of civilizations, but every single one of those species had something in common. They'd evolved on worlds where cooperation was more valuable than competition, where negotiation was preferable to violence, where the smart play was usually to retreat and regroup rather than stand and fight. Humans were different. Humans came from a world where everything, the weather, the wildlife, the geography, even the bacteria, had spent millions of years trying to kill them. They'd survived by being too stubborn to die and too angry to quit. When faced with impossible odds, their first instinct wasn't to run or surrender or adapt. Their first instinct was to hit back harder. As the battle data flowed into the human fleet's tactical computers, something beautiful and terrible began to happen. The hive's attack patterns, their adaptation protocols, their biomechanical configurations, everything that had made them unstoppable against civilized opposition, was being dissected with the kind of cold, methodical precision that would have made a serial killer weep with envy. Pattern analysis complete, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh from the sensor station. The Hive bioships adapt through a combination of genetic restructuring and real-time learning algorithms. They study their opponent's tactics, identify weaknesses, then modify their own capabilities accordingly. "How long does the adaptation process take?" asked Reeves, his mind already racing through the tactical implications. "Varies by complexity, but typically between 3 and 7 minutes. For major structural changes, they're incredibly efficient at their predictable," Reeves interrupted, a slow smile spreading across his scarred features. "They think they're dealing with another civilized species that fights by rules." Around the bridge, understanding began to dawn on faces that had seen too much war to believe in easy victories. The Hive's greatest strength, their ability to adapt to any threat, was also their greatest weakness. They needed time to study their opponents, to understand their tactics, to restructure themselves accordingly. But humans didn't fight by rules. Humans fought dirty. "All ships, this is Admiral Reeves," he announced over the fleet communication system. You've all seen the tactical data. "The enemy adapts to consistent patterns. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to be inconsistent. Every ship fights different. Every squadron uses different tactics. We're going to hit them with everything we've got, all at once, and we're going to keep changing the game faster. Then they can figure out the rules." Through the viewport, the Hive bioships were beginning to notice their new visitors. Massive organic holes were turning in their direction, weapon ports opening like hungry mouths preparing to feed. The things were beautiful in their own horrible way-living starships that pulsed with captured energy, their surfaces crawling with biomechanical activity that defied every law of physics humanity had ever discovered. But here's the thing about humanity's relationship with physics: they'd been ignoring inconvenient laws since they first figured out how to make fire underwater. "Sir," called out Lieutenant Mitchell from his weapons station, "I'm getting targeting locks on at least 300 Hive vessels. They're moving to intercept." "Weapons free," Reeves replied calmly. "All ships engage at will." What happened next would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy as either the most brilliant tactical innovation in recorded history or the most insane display of organized violence ever witnessed by sentient beings. Probably both. The human fleet didn't charge in formation or execute textbook maneuvers or follow any recognized pattern of interstellar warfare. Instead, they did something that no civilized species had ever attempted. They attacked like humans, destroyers, peeled off to engage targets 10 times their size. Cruisers ignored proper targeting protocols and opened fire on whatever looked dangerous. Fighter squadrons abandoned their escort duties to dive straight into the heart of the enemy formation. It was chaos, pure and simple, the kind of beautiful, terrible chaos that could only come from a species that had learned warfare on a world where survival was never guaranteed. And for the first time in their existence, the Hive hesitated. Their bioships began cycling through adaptation protocols, trying to counter tactics that changed every few seconds. Genetic restructuring programs crashed as they attempted to process combat data that defied every pattern. In their experience, for creatures that had consumed entire civilizations through perfect adaptation, suddenly facing an enemy that refused to be predictable was like trying to solve an equation where the numbers kept changing. "Multiple Hive vessels showing structural instability," reported Commander Walsh, her voice tight with excitement. "Their adaptation systems are overloading." Through the tactical display, Reeves watched as the first Hive bioship simply ... stopped. Its hull spasmed once, twice, then went dark as its biological systems shut down from sheer confusion. A second ship followed, then a third, their organic computers overwhelmed by the impossible task of adapting to adaptive opponents. But the rest of the Hive was learning, and they were learning fast. "Sir," called Mitchell urgently, the remaining vessels are beginning to counter-adapt. They're developing new protocols, specifically designed to... The transmission cut off as something the size of a city block slammed into the Vengeance's shields, sending the entire ship spinning like a child's toy. Through the viewport, Reeves could see one of the larger Hive bioships bearing down on them, its hull reconfigured into something that looked like a mechanical spider crossed with a nightmare. "All hands brace for impact," he announced calmly, then turned to his weapons officer with the kind of smile that had made enemy commanders reconsider their career choices. Mitchell, let's show them what happens when humans get creative. The war for the galaxy was about to begin in earnest. You want to know what hell looks like? It's not fire and brimstone. It's watching a species that's never known defeat suddenly realize they might lose everything. When humans get that particular look in their eyes, well, that's when the universe learns why Earth is classified as a death world. The Battle of Talora. Prime started the way most human victories do, with someone doing something absolutely insane that should have gotten them killed, but somehow worked instead. In this case, it was Captain Lisa Hayes of the destroyer used Defiant. Watching her plasma cannons bounce off a hive bioship's freshly adapted hull like rubber balls off a brick wall. Well, that's new, she muttered, studying the tactical readout. That showed her primary weapons had suddenly become about as effective as harsh language. The hive vessel, something that looked like a mechanical squid crossed with a fever dream, was already reconfiguring itself to counter her ship's entire arsenal. Most civilized species would have retreated at this point, called for backup, regrouped, developed a new strategy over the course of several committee meetings. But Captain Hayes had grown up on Titan, where the atmosphere was poison and the weather could kill you just by existing. She'd learned early that sometimes the only way through a problem was straight ahead. "Helm, give me ramming speed," she ordered calmly. "Ma'am?" Her navigation officer, Lieutenant Commander Brett Johnson, turned to stare at her with the expression of a man who'd just been asked to juggle live grenades. "Did you say ramming speed? You heard me? Plot an intercept course through their formation? Let's see how well they adapt to 300,000 tons of angry human engineering." The Defiant accelerated like a bullet fired from God's own pistol, her engines painting a brilliant streak across the star-scattered void. The hive bioships tried to scatter, their organic hulls rippling as they attempted to calculate defense patterns for an attack that defied every law of tactical engagement. But here's the beautiful part. They couldn't adapt fast enough. Their biological computers were still processing the concept of deliberate collision. When Hayes' destroyer punched through their formation like a fist through tissue paper, her reinforced prow tearing through biomechanical hulls that had never been designed to withstand that kind of focused stupidity, the explosion, when it came, was visible from 3 star systems away. "Holy shit," breathed Major Tom Brooks from the cockpit of his fighter, watching the fireball expand across his tactical display. "Did Hayes just ram a bioship?" "Correction," crackled the voice of his wingman, Lieutenant Amy Chen. "She rammed 3 bioships. At the same time?" Brooks couldn't help grinning behind his helmet's faceplate. He'd flown with Hayes during the Martian Rebellion, back when she was just a hotshot pilot with more guts than sense. "Some things never changed, Dan, thank God for that. It's all squadrons. This is Reaper-led," he growled over the squadron frequency, his fighter diving toward the swarm of hive vessels that surrounded Taylor Prime like metallic parasites. Around him, 47 other fighters followed in perfect formation, their engines screaming defiance at the laws of physics. Brooks had seen the intelligence reports from the surface, knew about the schools that had been consumed, the hospitals that had been converted into biomechanical processing centers, the playgrounds that now pulsed with alien machinery. His own daughter was safe back on New Geneva, probably asleep in her bed with her stuffed elephant, but that didn't matter. Every kid down there was somebody's little girl, somebody's pride and joy, somebody's reason for getting up in the morning. "These bug bastards want to eat kids," he snarled, locking onto the nearest bioship and feeling his weapons systems sing their deadly song. "Let's show them what Deathworlders do to child killers." The fighter squadron hit the hive formation like a hammer hitting glass. Plasma bolts and missile trails painted abstract art across the vacuum, each explosion marking another small victory against creatures that had consumed entire civilizations. But this wasn't about destroying the enemy. This was about buying time for the real heroes to do their work. Down on the planet's surface, Sergeant Ryan Clark was having the worst day of his military career, which was saying something, considering he'd survived the siege of Europa Station. The Taloran shelter system had been designed to protect civilians from natural disasters. not biomechanical nightmares that could eat through solid rock. The reinforced doors were holding for now, but Clark could hear the scratching, gnawing. Sounds of hive drones trying to break through. He kicked down the emergency entrance with the kind of casual violence that marked him. Someone who'd grown up in Earth's gravity well. The alien children inside, maybe 30 of them. All under 10 years old by Taloran standards, screamed in terror at the sight of his powered armor. To them, he probably looked like another monster come to drag them into the darkness. Hey, it's okay, Clark said quickly, removing his helmet to reveal a face that was about as far from monstrous as you could get. Sure, there were scars as souvenir from the Proxima Centauri police action, but his eyes were gentle. It's the kind that belonged to someone who'd held his own baby daughter just 6 months ago. Uncle Ryan's here to take you home. He'd been practicing. The phrase in broken Taloran during the drop, using the translation software in his armor's computer. It came out sounding like a dying whale, trying to recite poetry, but the kids seemed to understand. One of them, a little girl, with the kind of wide, trusting eyes that could break your heart, reached out tentatively to touch his armored gauntlet. Human? She whispered in accented standard. That's right, sweetheart. I'm human, and I'm going to get you out of here. Above them, the sky was painting itself in shades of violence and heroism. Lieutenant Kate Williams had been having a perfectly routine day of aerial combat dodging biomechanical tentacles, outmaneuvering organic missiles, and generally making the hive's existence as miserable as possible when her fighter's engine decided to have a catastrophic disagreement with the laws of thermodynamics. Mayday, mayday, she called over the emergency frequency, watching her power levels drop toward zero with the kind of detached fascination that comes with accepting your own mortality. This is Ghost 7's. 7. I've got multiple system failures, and I'm going down. Through her cockpit canopy, she could see the largest hive cluster on the continent, a writhing mass of biomechanical horror. That was systematically processing everything in its path, thousands of the things all connected in some obscene parody of a neural network. Working together to turn a civilization into raw materials, her ejection seat was right there, just waiting for her to pull the handle and float safely to the ground where the recovery teams could pick her up. Standard operating procedure. The smart play. It's a civilized thing to do. But Kate Williams hadn't joined the fighter corps to make smart plays. Ghost 77 to control, she said calmly, her hands steady on the controls as she aimed her crippled fighter toward the heart of the hive cluster. I'm switching to manual control. Tell my mom I love her. She cut the cum channel before anyone could order her to eject, then pushed her fighter's nose down toward the target that would make her death count for something. The hive drones tried to intercept her biomechanical interceptors, rising like mechanical locusts to swat down the damaged human fighter, but Kate had grown up racing atmospheric craft through the storm systems of Jupiter's moons. She'd learned to fly in conditions that would make sane pilots weep. Come on, you ugly sons of bitches, she whispered, threading her fighter through defensive fire that could have vaporized a city block. Let's dance. The explosion, when it came, took out nearly half the hive cluster and lit up the night sky, like a second sun. In the refugee shelters below, Taloran children pointed at the fireball and whispered stories about the human angel, who'd turned herself into a star to keep them safe. Meanwhile, in orbit around the dying world, the evacuation transports were launching with precious cargo ship after ship filled with civilians, who should have been processed into biomechanical components hours ago. The rescue operation was working, but only because human forces were holding the line with blood and bullets, and the kind of pure, stubborn rage that had carried their species from the caves of Trefsus. Africa to the stars. Admiral Reeves watched it all from the bridge of the Vengeance, his tactical display showing losses that would have broken the heart of any sane commander. They'd lost 30% of their fleet in the first hour, and the hive was already adapting to their tactics. By any reasonable military standard, they should have been retreating to fight another day. But reasonable military standards had never applied to humans. Sir, reported Commander Walsh, her voice tight with exhaustion and something that might have been pride. The last transport just cleared the gravity well. We got them all? All of them? Reeves asked. Every last civilian. Through the viewport, Talora Prime was dying. Its cities consumed, its oceans boiled away, its very atoms being converted into more hive bioships. But its people, its children, its future that was racing towards safety in the cargo holds of human transports, guarded by pilots who'd rather die than let them down. The hive had learned something. Today, about the species they'd dismissed as primitive Deathworlders. They'd learned that humans didn't fight wars to win territory or resources or political advantage. They fought wars to protect the things they loved. And when you threaten what humans love, well, that's when they stop being civilized and start being dangerous. The real battle was just beginning. You know what they say about winning. Sometimes it costs more than losing. Sometimes, if you're very lucky and very unlucky at the same time, it teaches the universe something it didn't know it needed to learn. The hive retreat began at 0347 hours, Galactic Standard Time, though. Calling it a retreat was like calling a hurricane a gentle breeze. For the first time in their species' existence, the biomechanical horrors that had consumed dozens of civilizations were pulling back. Their organic hulls scarred and smoking from weapons they'd never encountered before. Admiral Reeves stood on the bridge of what was left of the UES Vengeance, watching his tactical display track the enemy withdrawal with the kind of exhausted disbelief that comes after surviving something that should have killed you 6 different ways. His ship looked like it had been put through a blender. Half the hull plating was gone. The main engines were held together with prayer and duct tape, and there was a hole in the starboard bulkhead that you could drive a shuttle through. But she was still flying, still fighting, still human. "Sensor sweep complete, sir," reported Commander Walsh, her voice hoarse from 12 hours of continuous battle commands. "The hive bioships are jumping to hyperspace, all of them. It's actually over." Around the bridge, the surviving crew members exchanged glances that contained entire conversations. They'd done it. Somehow, impossibly against odds that would have made mathematicians weep, they'd actually done it. The unstoppable force had met an immovable object, and for once in galactic history, the immovable object had won. But victory, when it came, tasted like ashes and salt tears. The final casualty reports were still coming in, but the numbers were already burned into Reeves' memory with the kind of permanent scarring that changes a person forever. 90,000 humans dead, nearly half their fleet destroyed. Entire squadrons that had simply vanished into balls of superheated plasma, taking their crews with them into whatever comes after the last duty shift. Captain Lisa Hayes and the crew of the Defiant, Major Tom Brooks and his fighter squadron, Lieutenant Kate Williams, who'd turned herself into a weapon when her ship failed her. Thousands of others whose names would be carved into memorial walls across human space. Their stories told to children who would grow up knowing that heroes were real and they looked just like ordinary people until the moment they chose to be extraordinary. They'd ask for nothing in return. No territory, no resources, no political concessions. They'd just shown up, fought impossible odds, died in numbers that would have broken lesser species, and left behind something that the galaxy had never seen before. Proof that some people would sacrifice everything for strangers. 3 days later, Ambassador Velka stood in what used to be the crystal gardens of her capital city, watching human medics work alongside Talaran doctors in field hospitals that smelled of disinfectant. In determination, the elegant spires that had taken millennia to build were gone, reduced to rubble and memories by the hive's appetite. But the people, somehow, miraculously, the people had survived. All 412 million of them. She watched a human. Corman couldn't have been more than 20 years old, with the kind of face that belonged in a college classroom rather than a war zone, carefully bandaging
Ow!
the injured wing of a Taloran child. His hands were steady despite the exhaustion lines around his eyes. His touch gentle despite the powered armor that made him look like a mechanical giant. "Does it hurt?" the child asked in broken standard, her large eyes fixed on the human's scarred face. "Just a little," the medic replied in equally broken Taloran, his voice carrying the kind of warmth that transcends language barriers. "But you're very brave. Braver than some soldiers I know. The little girl actually giggled, despite everything she'd been through. Despite watching her world burn, despite hiding in shelters while monsters tried to eat her civilization, despite being saved by the very species her people had called to, violent for civilized society. That's when Velka finally understood what they'd really lost when they rejected humanity's council application. It wasn't just another military alliance or trading partner. It was the chance to learn from a species that had figured out something the rest of the galaxy had missed. That strength without compassion was just brutality. But compassion without strength was just wishful thinking. I don't understand, she whispered to Admiral Reeves as he approached through the refugee camp, his own uniform still stained with the kind of things you don't want to think about too closely. Around them, human and Talaran children were playing together, some bizarre combination of tag and hide-and-seek that required no common language, just the universal childhood ability to find joy in the midst of tragedy. She gestured toward a human Marine who was teaching a group of alien youngsters how to fold paper airplanes, his massive hands working with surprising delicacy to crease the recycled paper just right. We rejected you, called you savages, said your violent nature made you unfit for civilized space. Why did you sacrifice everything for us? Reeves was quiet for a long moment, watching the Marine launch his paper creation into the air, where it danced on the artificial breeze from the camp's life support systems. The big man's hands were shaking from exhaustion, from grief, from the kind of emotional overload that comes after watching good people die for something larger than themselves. You called us Deathworlders like it was a curse, he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 90,000 empty bunks and folded flags. But you never understood what that really means. He turned to face her, and Velka saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not anger she'd expected anger. Not satisfaction at being proven right that would have been understandable. What she saw was pain. The deep, abiding pain of someone who'd paid a price he'd gladly pay again. Wished he'd never had to pay in the first place. It means we know what it's like to lose everything, he continued, gesturing toward the makeshift memorial that was growing at the camps. Edge flowers and personal effects and handwritten notes in a dozen languages, all honoring the humans who'd died too, save strangers. Our world tried to kill us every single day for millions of years, whether that could sterilize continents, predators that made nightmare fuel look cuddly, diseases that could wipe out entire populations before we even knew they existed. A paper airplane drifted past them, carrying the laughter of children who should have been dead but were somehow, possibly alive, and playing in the ruins of their world. We learned that life is precious because we've seen how easily it can be lost, Reeves said, his voice barely above a whisper. We learned that some things are worth dying for, and protecting innocence is at the top of that list. You can call us violent, call us savage, call us whatever makes you feel better about excluding us from your club. But when the monsters come calling, we're the ones who'll stand between them and your children. The Galactic Council's emergency session convened exactly 18 hours later. Broad. Live across civilized space with the kind of frantic urgency usually reserved for natural disasters. The elegant chambers that had witnessed humanity's rejection just 6 months earlier were packed with representatives who suddenly understood they'd made the kind of mistake that historians write cautionary tales about. The first agenda item wasn't trade agreements or territorial disputes or any of the usual political maneuvering that kept the galaxy's bureaucrats employed. It was a formal apology to humanity and an immediate offer of full council membership, complete with all the benefits and privileges they'd been denied.